are in e-commerce, they're vendors. They sell online, they're ink sellers, they sell jewelry. Also, a lot of my clients are in the online advertising space. And so a lot of the rules regarding disclosures that Chuck talked about are very relevant and important to them. And Chuck's boss has investigated a couple of my clients. And in addition, I also represent a number of victims of cyber harassment. So that's basically kind of what I do. And so I'm working in the internet every day in trying to represent people in this kind of new and emerging field. So I'd like to start off by talking about the big picture. And if you're going to talk about the big picture, you might as well start with the big picture. And we chose the Great Wall of China for a reason. One is that in thinking about the recent passing of Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, and I recalled that they said that from the moon, the only man-made structure you can see from the moon is the Great Wall of China. And one thing you can't see from the moon is the border of the internet. So you can't see where the internet becomes an EU internet or United States internet or even a China internet. And there's a good reason why, because that border doesn't exist. You know, the internet is a global thing, and so we're talking in the context of various national laws regulating the internet. And so far, we've been fortunate that on a global level, a lot of our laws and how we've approached it have been fairly complementary. And so let's hope that events like these can further that so that we continue to have an internet that is not obstructed by divergent approaches to regulating e-commerce. So I wanted to emphasize that we're in a new epoch, a new era when it comes to e-commerce. And we started off with the Great Wall because initially the early regulation of the internet was really akin to a frontier society. It was a new area, and when you build a frontier, if you go out to the hinterland, just like the wall was built to protect from remote attackers, you really want to protect the viability of this new fledgling enterprise, this community. And clearly China doesn't need the wall today, and the same is true with e-commerce. We took care of initial issues like protecting consumers so they felt safe to go on the internet. And those were some of the early laws that we enacted. And what's interesting about them is that they were generally enacted through consensus. Both the business community and government agreed on dealing with issues such as spyware, spam, phishing, and children's privacy, as Chuck discussed. And so now we're in a more complicated era. And I call it e-commerce 2.0. And to give you an example of why it's different, it's more complicated. And the one thing that defines the 2.0 era is there are more parties involved than in the first kind of wave of laws that we dealt with. There's different platforms. When we talk about the internet, do we mean this laptop? Do we mean a mobile phone? What exactly is the internet when we regulate it? And so I use the big data because that's a big issue now. Everything we do on the internet, some data is collected about it. We leave a footprint. And right now there's a growing debate in the European Union and in the United States over how that footprint should be regulated. In fact, there's a gentleman who's about to join the FTC who's written an article that calls the data that's being collected a database of ruin. So it's a debate that's really starting to tee up. And I thought I'd give an example of how this data might be used with a theoretical transaction involving Tmall, a popular site here in China, with 3 different consumers. And I used a dog because there's a famous cartoon in the United States that has a dog on a computer talking to another dog, which of course we know happens every day. And the dog explains to his fellow dog that the nice thing about the internet is no one knows you're a dog. And so that's why I included Fido in the picture. So when these three consumers go to Tmall and they reach that site, each one likely will get a different advertisement. And the reason that is because Tmall, or the American version, or likely has some sort of data collection and assistance working with marketers who tee up the ads on their website, and they have profiles or histories on consumers, so they know that when a consumer goes to a website, they want to serve the most relevant advertisements to them. And so often they will have some degree of past history, whether it's, we know that this person went to these type of sites, or we just know people from this zip code have certain areas of interest. And so the woman at the top, well, she might get a Chanel ad. The gentleman might get an Apple ad, and of course Fido will get milk bones. But all that through the use of big data. And so that's becoming an area of controversy. Another area that's becoming part of this whole new debate that we're having about regulation of the internet is kind of a reevaluation of existing laws. Usually once you pass something, then the debate is closed. But we're seeing that as new problems emerge on the internet, people are chafing over the restrictions of the immunity granted to websites under there's a section of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act called the Communications Decency Act, which gives people like eBay and other sites immunity for the content that's posted up there. And right now there's a movement in the United States to restrict prostitution ads, particularly as it relates to minors. And they want sites to verify that we're talking about that an ad that is placed, that you want you to verify that that is someone who is at least of age, even though prostitution is illegal in the United States. And so, and people are wondering whether, in order to do that, which is the greater social good? Allowing unfettered debate as is permitted under the Communications Decency Act, or protecting children from sex trafficking. And so this has become a new area of debate in the United States. And the other thing that's part of this whole 2.0 era is you have more, as I mentioned, more actors, more platforms. Here's an example of, it's driving my client nuts. It's a competing, it's a review site that's out there, and it reviews, it posts a negative review of my client's site, and then it posts a positive review of a competitor's site, and doesn't disclose that it's getting paid by the competitor. And so these are new issues that we're adapting to in the 2.0 era. So